How dare you question my strategy? The scream did not echo. It slammed into me, wet with spit and rage, in an auditorium explicitly designed for acoustic clarity. He leaned over the polished mahogany podium, his face flushing a dangerous blotchy violet under the intense spotlight fixtures. "I am trying to save this quarter, and you are peddling fear," he bellowed, pointing a trembling finger directly at where I sat in the very front row. "You are a mid-level analyst with a calculator. I am the visionary here. If you cannot get on board with the acceleration protocol, then get out of my press conference immediately." He turned to face the 20 national journalists and live television cameras, grinning with erratic arrogance. "Ladies and gentlemen, excuse my lead structural engineer. She lacks the intestinal stomach for the future we are actively constructing. She foolishly believes that structural concrete curing is a fixed law of physical science. I say, physics works for us." I did not pack my leather portfolio frantically. I did not run out of the auditorium. I did not cry. I sat there calmly with my hands folded in my lap, feeling the subtle vibrations of the floorboards as he paced across the stage like a theatrical conqueror. I watched him casually dismiss my 3 full years of rigorous concrete stress test data with a single arrogant wave of his hand. He demanded that the multi-billion-dollar megabridge be completed in 12 months rather than 24 months. He wanted the massive early completion bonus attached to his executive employment agreement. I stood up slowly and deliberately. The atmosphere in the auditorium was thick with second-hand embarrassment. I looked him dead in the center of his forehead, nodded once in quiet acknowledgement of receipt rather than surrender, and walked out the side exit. I left my official media credentials resting on the velvet chair behind me. He assumed that was the end of our confrontation. He believed he had crushed my professional career into the pavement like wet gravel. He was entirely unaware that while he was celebrating his victory lap in front of national television crews, the powerful institutions owning the capital he was squandering were dialing my personal cellular phone number. Before we delve into what transpired when I answered that call and how I held him accountable for every brutal word he shouted that afternoon, let me explain my background. My name is Claire Vance. I do not possess a flashy personality, nor do I navigate corporate political games with ease, but I live and breathe heavy infrastructure engineering. While other teenagers played video games, I obsessed over suspension cable dynamics, shear stress equations, and aggregate hydration chemistry. To me, the physical universe is not governed by executive intentions or quarterly financial projections. It is governed strictly by mechanical loads and structural resistances. Bridges are not static piles of steel and stone. They are living, breathing mathematical equations holding millions of innocent commuters up against the unyielding force of gravity every day. When I look at a massive suspension span crossing a saltwater bay, I do not see a picturesque landscape. I see an endless, high-stakes battle between vehicle weight and cable tensile strength. I dedicated my career to ensuring gravity never wins that battle. I served as lead structural engineer for the Bayview Crossing mega project, a pinnacle assignment representing 20 years of professional dedication. It was supposed to be my engineering legacy. Then came Vice President Garrett Pierce from the realm of private equity. He did not know a kilonewton from a kilogram. He viewed the Bayview Crossing not as a monumental triumph of engineering, but as a financial asset on a balance sheet. He did not understand tensile yield strength versus shear failure, and he cared even less. Garrett was tall, wore tailored Italian suits that cost more than a year of average wages, and spoke exclusively in corporate buzzwords. He had been brought in by the board of directors to streamline operations and slice expenditure. In his mind, engineering safety margins were wasted capital waiting to be recaptured. He cared only about securing his early completion bonus, a payout vast enough to fund a private tropical villa. Our friction began early. In board meetings, he would inquire why we specified high-grade structural steel over cheaper alternatives. I carefully explained salt air corrosion factors and long-term fatigue limits. He would roll his eyes, tap his gold pen, and glance at his watch. "Claire," he would say condescendingly, "you engineers think in decades. I think in fiscal quarters. We must accelerate." "Kynings does not care about your fiscal quarter, Garrett," I informed him. Gravity does not negotiate with private equity. He despised that truth. The critical crisis began 6 months prior to the press conference. I officially flagged the concrete pouring specifications. The 12-month timeline he promised the board was physically impossible. Concrete curing is an exothermic hydration reaction requiring precise duration to form crystalline matrices. To meet his artificial deadline, Garrett unilaterally replaced our certified concrete supplier with a firm providing rapid-set chemical compounds. He viewed it as a financial miracle. I recognized it as a death trap. My computational stress models clearly demonstrated that under high wind conditions, extreme structural rigidity would induce internal microfractures. Standard structural concrete possesses a tiny degree of elastic flexibility under lateral wind loads. This rapid set formulation was far too brittle. While it might appear flawless on a calm morning, our bridge was situated directly inside a primary hurricane corridor. An intense storm would eventually strike at a dangerous vector. I presented these simulation models to him, but he dismissed them as pessimistic computer noise. 3 weeks before the public conference, I entered his frozen executive office. "I need your signature on the Sector 4 pour," he demanded without facing me. "I cannot sign that document, Garrett." I placed a concrete core sample on his mahogany desk. Under microscopic analysis, this sample is honeycombed. The rapid chemical curing generated severe interior air pockets. He dropped the concrete sample into his wastebasket, calling it an expensive paperweight. "We are pouring Sector 4 on Monday, with or without your signature. If you pour that concrete," I warned, "I will refuse to certify the structural safety rating. The state will never issue an occupancy permit." "You are an employee, Claire. You are replaceable. The schedule is not." He needed me removed because I was the sole licensed engineer refusing to sign off on his fraudulent timeline. But terminating me quietly would allow me to write op-eds and notify safety boards. He needed to utterly destroy my professional credibility. Therefore, he staged the press conference under the false promise of announcing a safety delay, only to launch a public attack on live television to discredit any future warnings I might issue. Walking out of that auditorium into the bright afternoon sun was an agonizing experience. Every professional instinct urged me to seize the podium microphone and lecture the media on chemical thermodynamics, but I realized it would be futile. In their eyes, he was the visionary corporate leader, and I was merely a stubborn analyst holding a calculator. I took the public subway home, surrounded by commuters, unaware that the executive boasting on television was preparing to build them a tomb across the bay. At 8 o'clock that evening, my telephone vibrated continuously on my drafting table. I picked it up with a cold breath. "What is it?" I asked. "We watched the entire press conference broadcast," a low, gravelly voice said, commanding immediate authority. "Who is speaking?" I inquired. "I represent the primary financing syndicate," the voice answered. "And I have 2 managing partners listening on this line. In mega infrastructure projects, private equity syndicates advance billions of dollars, recouped over decades through toll revenues. They rarely telephone mid-level structural engineers. He claims you are excessively risk-averse." Managing partner Eleanor Thorne interjected. "He claims his accelerated schedule saves our syndicate $200 million. Garrett is lying to your board," I stated clearly. "The rapid set compound generates extreme exothermic heat during curing. The internal matrix honeycombs with subsurface air pockets. The structure will appear pristine for the ribbon cutting. But the first seasonal hurricane with sustained 60-mile-per-hour winds will induce harmonic resonance. Sector 4 will fail catastrophically." A heavy silence descended upon the secure line. "Can you prove this assertion mathematically?" Eleanor Thorne inquired. "I already have," I answered. "Garrett deleted my computational models from the central corporate server, but I authored the underlying simulation code. Under Section 106 of Title 17 of the United States Code, known as the Federal Copyright Act, I retain exclusive personal copyright over my proprietary algorithms. He committed federal copyright infringement by misusing my work. Furthermore, by terminating key engineering personnel without 60 days of statutory notice, his actions trigger severe financial penalties under the Federal Warning Act." And by misrepresenting material structural safety risks to secure his bonus, he committed a flagrant breach of fiduciary duty under Delaware corporate law. She knows her federal statutes as thoroughly as her concrete mixes, a third partner remarked with a quiet chuckle. We do not need to recover his deleted files, Eleanor Thorne declared. We need to know if you are willing to stake your professional reputation on that structural math. I lost my position 4 hours ago, I replied. I have nothing left to lose except the objective truth. Excellent, the gravelly voice said. Our syndicate has no intention of halting construction publicly right now. Stopping the project today causes public confidence to collapse and bond ratings to plummet. We need the Bayview crossing completed, but we require total financial insulation from his reckless shortcuts. What are you proposing? I asked. We wish to retain you immediately, Eleanor Thorne stated. Not as a project engineer, but as the chief auditor and director of liability risk assessment for our newly created insurance underwriting subsidiary. The next fortnight was an intense blur of high-level legal drafting and non-disclosure agreements. I spent long days inside a windowless conference room, reviewing contracts thicker than municipal building codes. The syndicate recognized that Garrett Pierce was a dangerous liability, but terminating him outright would spark market panic. They needed the bridge opened, but they knew my structural warnings were accurate. As financial hedge funds, they hedged their positions, betting on the bridge opening while simultaneously hedging against its structural failure, selecting me to manage that risk. Meanwhile, Garrett conducted a triumphant victory tour across financial television networks. With me removed, he bullied remaining junior staff into rubber stamping the rapid set pour. He terminated 2 additional engineers who raised questions, violating the Warren Act again, and replaced them with inexperienced entry-level staff. Corporate stock price soared, and Garrett granted glossy interviews about eliminating legacy engineering bureaucracy. He believed he had won completely, ignorant of the fact that I was working 3 blocks away, auditing his insurance binders and preparing an inescapable legal trap. The key to managing multi-billion-dollar infrastructure risk lies in catastrophic liability insurance binding. For a mega project to legally open, state government requires a massive liability policy. Without a certified insurance binder signed by a licensed underwriter, the Department of Transportation will not permit a single commuter vehicle to cross. Ordinarily, insurance binding is a routine formality. Garrett anticipated a rubber stamp approval, having already allocated projected insurance savings toward his completion bonus pool. Exactly 2 weeks after the press conference, a formal corporate directive was delivered directly to Garrett's desk, a mandatory executive memo from the syndicate's board. The directive stated that due to global market volatility, the financing syndicate had established an independent risk assessment subsidiary to underwrite all liability policies. The memo introduced the newly appointed Director of Liability Risk Assessment, Claire Vance. Colleagues later informed me that the color drained completely from his face upon reading that document. The mid-level analyst he had publicly humiliated now held absolute statutory authority over the insurance binder required to open his bridge. 3 days later, Garrett arrived at my new corporate suite overlooking the harbor. Clad in a slightly disheveled suit with sweat stains around his collar, he hesitated at the doorway. "Claire," he began, his voice tight. "Director Vance," I corrected him calmly. He flinched, sat down uninvited, and I slid a single binding document across the glass desk. "This represents the mandatory liability policy terms," I said quietly. He scanned the figures until he reached the financial summary, his jaw dropping in shock. "This annual premium is 400% higher than our projected budget. It completely wipes out our net profit margin and eliminates my completion bonus." I leaned back comfortably. "That is the high-velocity curing risk surcharge," I explained. "Since you publicly declared that physics works for you, I calculated underwriting risk based on honeycomb interior fractures in Sector 4. "You cannot enforce this," he shouted. "You are doing this purely out of personal vendetta." "No," I replied coldly. "I am doing this to insulate the financial syndicate against structural collapse. However, there is a legal rider on page 4 called the confidence clause." "A confidence clause?" he repeated. a desperate glimmer of hope appearing in his eyes. He assumed I was offering a covert compromise, failing to comprehend I was presenting a binding financial execution device. "Write it aloud, Garrett," I said, pointing to the paragraph at the bottom of the page. "If the lead project manager agrees to personally indemnify the policy deductible and agrees to mandatory daily structural data monitoring conducted by the director's office for 10 years, the annual premium drops back to standard market rates." He stared at me in disbelief. "Personally indemnify? You want me to pledge my personal assets, stock options, and real estate portfolio?" "If your rapid set strategy is as flawless as you proclaimed," I stated, "your personal risk is precisely zero. You informed the press I was peddling fear. If my calculations are incorrect, you pay nothing and retain your bonus. You simply must affix your signature next to your public assertion." The office was deathly quiet. He looked at the document, then at me, and finally toward the distant steel towers of the Bayview Crossing. He knew the concrete was honeycombed and that he had forged lab-compliant seals. Committing civil and criminal forgery. Refusing to sign meant the 400% premium surcharge took effect immediately, triggering a syndicate audit into his procurement fraud. Signing allowed the project to open, securing his bonus while gambling that the bridge would stand. He grabbed the black pen, his wrist stiffening before his greed prevailed, and signed his name on the line, designated primary personal indemnifier. He shoved the paper back across the desk. "There, you have your pound of flesh." "I do not want flesh, Garrett," I said, placing the contract into a secure file. "I require structural integrity. Your binder is approved. The construction site may remain active." The ribbon-cutting ceremony took place on a chilly Tuesday morning in November. Garrett Pierce stood on the high podium, surrounded by state governors and television crews, looking noticeably thinner in a suit hanging loosely on his frame. Today, Garrett shouted into the microphones, "We prove that bold corporate vision conquers all traditional obstacles. We built." The crowd applauded. I watched the broadcast from my computer monitor 3 miles away, monitoring real-time sensor telemetry on my secondary screens. And wind was gusting at 35 miles per hour. My sensors registered an unnatural harmonic vibration as Sector 4 twisted slightly against the extreme brittleness of the rapid-set concrete. On live television, Garrett suddenly froze mid-sentence, gripping the wooden podium tightly as he felt the deck vibrate beneath his feet. For 2 terrifying seconds, sheer panic broke through his facade before the wind gusts subsided. He cut the red ribbon hastily and retreated from the stage. The Bayview Crossing opened to public commuter traffic at midnight, and the following morning, Garrett's massive early completion bonus was wired into his personal bank account. He attempted to enjoy his wealth with frantic energy, purchasing a tropical oceanfront estate, a silver McLaren supercar, a city penthouse, and a luxury yacht named Velocity, spending money recklessly, as if trying to convert digital numbers into tangible physical assets before they evaporated. However, under the confidence clause, he was legally required to remain as active lead project manager for the entire 10-year warranty duration. If he resigned, the indemnity clause triggered automatically, resulting in the immediate seizure of all personal assets. Trapped in luxury, he was forced to report to work every morning to oversee the very structure that terrified him. Every morning at 8 o'clock sharp, an automated system email was dispatched from my server to his inbox. Daily structural integrity log, Sector 4. The telemetry read, status, stable, micro-deflection, 0.002 millimeters, acoustic emissions, nominal. Please acknowledge receipt. He was legally obligated to reply received within 2 hours. When he missed a deadline in midwinter, I dispatched a legal courier delivering a formal notice of breach of confidence clause, warning that a second failure would result in immediate asset forfeiture under Delaware corporate law. He replied 3 minutes later and never missed another log. The psychological pressure mounted. In January, a powerful coastal storm brought sustained winds of 65 miles per hour. I remained in my office all night tracking sensor telemetry. At 11 at night, Sector 4 sensors shifted from green to amber as acoustic emission sensors registered internal microsnapping. Pop, pop, pop. I dialed Garrett's direct line. "Director," he rasped, his voice cracking. "Is it failing?" "Not yet," I answered. Internal acoustic emissions in Sector 4 are elevated as honeycomb air pockets crush under shear stress. Should we close the span? He pleaded frantically. I reminded him of his legal realities. Closing the bridge without an official structural failure declaration triggers the lost revenue clause, making him personally liable for $200,000 per hour in lost tolls. Leaving it open risks structural failure and federal prosecution under Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Section 807 and 18 U.S.C., Section 1348 for corporate fraud. He slammed the receiver down and sat through the night praying. The storm passed by 4 in the morning, and Garrett sent a frantic email claiming his strategy had won. But structural concrete degrades progressively over thousands of stress cycles. On March 14th, 4 months after ribbon cutting, a flashing red alert dominated my diagnostic dashboard. Critical system alert. Sector 4, continuity loss. Sensor B12, crack width, 3.5 millimeters. A 3.5 millimeter crack in a main load-bearing pylon was a fatal wound. The rapid-set concrete had failed, allowing salt air and moisture to penetrate internal rebar. I called Garrett's personal cell while he was driving his silver McLaren. Pull your vehicle over immediately, I instructed. What are you talking about? He snapped. Sensor B12 in Sector 4 confirmed an active structural crack of 3.5 millimeters. The confidence clause is officially triggered. Check your banking applications right now. I heard him fumbling with his phone, followed by a gasp of horror. Access denied? He whimpered because the mandatory deductible for structural remediation is $150 million, I explained. Under the confidence clause, your personal liquid accounts, investment portfolios, real estate deeds, and luxury assets are frozen to prevent capital flight. You froze everything, he shrieked. I suggest you walk, I said quietly. It is a pleasant morning for a walk, and you can inspect the structural cracks on your way. Garrett sprinted the final mile to the administration building, abandoning his supercar on the highway shoulder. When he burst into my executive office, he collapsed into a chair opposite my desk. Fix this, he wheezed. Claire, please, undo the contract trigger. I will resign immediately. Just do not strip everything I own. I looked at him across the polished desk, feeling only the satisfaction of a complex mathematical equation reaching equilibrium. I cannot alter telemetry, Garrett. Physical laws do not care about your personal net worth. They care only about structural loads and material limits. I am completely ruined, he sobbed. Correct, I noted. Every dollar will be drawn directly from your liquidated estate until the $150 million deductible is fully satisfied. That was the explicit agreement you signed. The financial and legal liquidation of Garrett Pierce's life was conducted with terrifying efficiency by the syndicate's legal team. They seized his multi-million-dollar completion bonus immediately from escrow to fund emergency structural carbon fiber wrapping. His tropical estate was listed for sale, his silver McLaren towed away, his yacht Velocity seized at the marina, and his city penthouse and luxury watch collection cataloged and liquidated. Under Delaware corporate law and federal guidelines, he was permitted to retain only a modest monthly living stipend based precisely on the median wage of an entry-level construction laborer. The executive who had worn $5,000 custom suits was now forced to purchase off-the-rack clothes at discount stores. However, his true punishment was mandatory ongoing employment. Because the confidence clause required him to remain as lead project manager to maintain the liability policy, he could not resign without facing federal criminal charges for structural fraud and Warren Act violations. He was demoted to a cramped metal maintenance trailer located near the gravel yard. Every morning he drove to the site in a 12-year-old rusted sedan, purchased with his meager stipend, opened his computer to review daily stress telemetry sent from my office, and legally authorized out-of-pocket work orders for ongoing structural maintenance. 6 months after the initial crack was detected, I visited his maintenance trailer. Garrett looked 20 years older, his hair thin and gray, his posture hunched, his face possessing the sickly pallor of a man deprived of restful sleep. He was staring blankly at a monitor displaying live video of the repair crew installing secondary steel support trusses. Director Vance, he said raspy, without looking up. Mr. Pierce, I replied. Telemetry indicates acoustic emissions in Sector 5 are elevated. We must schedule immediate core sample drilling. He flinched. Sector 5? Another potential failure point? Can it wait until next quarter? He asked in a defeated whisper. The sale of my tropical estate has not fully cleared escrow. I lack personal liquidity. Sunsings does not wait for real estate escrow, Garrett, I stated firmly. He closed his eyes, let out a shaky breath, picked up his plastic pen, and signed the repair authorization without argument. An entirely broken shell of a man kept functioning solely by his obligation to pay for reckless hubris. I turned to leave the trailer but paused near the door. You know, Garrett, you could have simply listened to my engineering reports 3 years ago and allowed the additional 12 months for proper concrete curing. He let out a bitter, dry laugh. I wanted to be remembered as a corporate visionary, he whispered softly. I wanted to leave a lasting mark on the world. You succeeded, I replied. You left a 3.5mm crack. I walked out of the trailer into the cool evening air as the sun set over the Bayview crossing. Commuter vehicles streamed safely across the span, drivers entirely unaware of the corporate drama and legal retribution that had unfolded below. They were safe because my sensor arrays monitored every millimeter of steel and concrete, and because Garrett Pierce was paying for every pound of structural reinforcement out of his own pocket. He remains trapped there to this day, with over 9 years remaining on his court-enforced indemnity contract. He will spend the next decade monitoring that bridge, trembling at storm warnings and dreading diagnostic reports issued by my office, a prisoner in an invisible prison bound by his own arrogant signature. He believed he could bully physical reality into submission for short-term profit. But physical reality always wins. Gravity always collects its debt in full. Standing near the water's edge, watching the first evening stars appear above the suspension towers, I felt complete professional peace. The stress forces were now perfectly balanced by structural resistance. The arrogant scream that had slammed into me in that auditorium felt like a distant memory. I am no longer merely an engineer with a calculator. I am the chief auditor, and I will remain here every single day to ensure that mathematical equations hold and that anyone who attempts to endanger human lives for corporate profit pays the ultimate price. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed seeing justice served in the most calculated way possible, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had a boss who refused to listen to reason? How did it end? I read every single comment. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about people getting exactly what they deserve. Until next time, looking back at the entire trajectory of the Bayview Crossing project, the contrast between executive grandstanding and raw physical truth could not be more distinct. When Garrett Pierce first stood on that stage and attempted to reduce complex civil engineering to empty public relations slogans, he genuinely believed that power belonged to whoever spoke loudest in front of television cameras. He failed to comprehend that heavy infrastructure is entirely unconcerned with social standing, corporate rank, or political leverage. A bridge span does not remain suspended because an executive gives a persuasive speech. It remains suspended because the microscopic crystalline bonds within the cured concrete matrix possess sufficient compressive strength to resist structural load forces. By attempting to shortcut those fundamental laws, Garrett set in motion a sequence of events that inevitably led to his own undoing. His fundamental mistake was assuming that technical experts could be bullied into silence without consequence. He believed that by attacking my professional reputation in a public venue, he would isolate me and force compliance. Instead, his public display exposed his own erratic behavior to the very financial institutions funding the project. The institutional syndicate recognized immediately that an executive who prioritizes short-term stock performance over foundational safety represents an existential risk to their capital investments. When they created the risk assessment subsidiary and appointed me as director, it was not an act of charity or sympathy. It was a cold, pragmatic risk mitigation strategy executed by sophisticated financial managers. They understood that an engineer who thinks strictly in terms of loads and tolerances is the only person capable of holding a reckless executive accountable. The confidence clause was designed specifically to align Garrett's personal financial incentives with the structural survival of the bridge. By forcing him to pledge his personal fortune as collateral for the policy deductible, the syndicate ensured that any structural failure caused by his rushed timeline would be paid for directly out of his personal estate rather than corporate funds. Today, as I review the daily diagnostic telemetry from my executive office, the system operates with mechanical efficiency. The sensor arrays embedded along the Bayview crossing continue to stream real-time strain, vibration, and acoustic data directly to our servers. Every micro-deflection is logged, analyzed, and archived. In the maintenance trailer below, Garrett Pierce continues his daily routine of reviewing error logs and signing repair authorizations. He has learned, through bitter experience, that every shortcut carries a precise financial cost and that gravity never grants discounts.